September 10th started like any ordinary Wednesday on the campus of Utah Valley University. Students were rushing to classes, professors were preparing lectures, and the autumn air carried that familiar buzz of academic life. But by the end of that day, this quiet university in Orem would become the center of a national tragedy that would send shockwaves across the entire country. Charlie Kirk, one of America's most recognizable conservative voices, had just kicked off what was supposed to be another routine stop on his campus speaking tour. At only 30 years old, Kirk had already built a political empire that reached millions of Americans. His organization, Turning Point USA, had become a powerhouse in conservative campus activism since he founded it as a teenager. Through social media, podcasts, and these very campus events, Kirk had established himself as a prominent figure in right-wing politics and a trusted ally of former President Trump. What happened next would transform an ordinary campus discussion into one of the most shocking political assassinations in modern American history. The events that unfolded in those crucial moments would trigger the largest manhunt the region had ever seen, involving federal agents, local law enforcement, and a desperate search for answers that would grip the nation for days. The setup seemed routine enough. Kirk had positioned himself in a tent on campus, ready to engage with students in the kind of spirited political debate that had made him famous. These encounters were his specialty, moments where he could directly challenge young minds and defend conservative principles against liberal opposition. He'd done this hundreds of times before across college campuses nationwide, but someone was watching from a distance. Approximately 430 feet away, positioned on a nearby rooftop, an individual had taken up what investigators would later describe as a sniper's position. The shooter lay prone, carefully calculating angles and timing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The conversation below continued as normal. Kirk was in his element, fielding questions from students with the confidence and quick wit that had made him a media sensation. One student posed a question about mass shootings in America over the past decade. It was exactly the kind of politically charged topic that Kirk thrived on addressing, the type of moment that would typically result in a viral clip circulating across social media platforms. But before the student could even finish their question, a single gunshot rang out across the campus. In an instant, everything changed. Kirk collapsed, struck in the neck by what investigators would later determine was a high-powered rifle round fired with deadly precision. Chaos erupted immediately. Students screamed and scattered in every direction as the reality of what had just occurred began to sink in. Emergency responders rushed to the scene as Kirk was quickly transported to Timpanogos Regional Hospital, fighting for his life. Meanwhile, witnesses reported seeing a figure in dark clothing sprinting across the rooftop where the shot had originated, then disappearing into the surrounding neighborhood. Within hours, the FBI had launched what would become one of the most intensive manhunts in recent memory. A $100,000 reward was posted for information leading to the capture of the suspect. Law enforcement agencies at every level mobilized resources, flooding the area with heavily armed officers and federal agents. The pressure was immense, the stakes couldn't be higher, and the clock was ticking. This wasn't just another crime. This was an attack on a prominent political figure that threatened to tear apart an already deeply divided nation. The investigation moved at breakneck speed, but the first 24 hours yielded nothing but false leads and mounting frustration. 2 individuals were brought in for questioning, only to be released when their alibis checked out. The FBI found themselves chasing shadows, while the real perpetrator remained at large. And with each passing hour, the pressure intensified exponentially. Then came the breakthrough that would crack the case wide open. It wasn't advanced forensics or sophisticated surveillance technology that led investigators to their suspect. Instead, it was something far more human and far more tragic. Tyler Robinson, a 23-year-old from Washington, Utah, had apparently confided in someone he trusted most, someone who would ultimately make the decision that brought his son's violent act to an end. Robinson's father, himself a veteran law enforcement officer, found himself in an impossible position when his son allegedly confessed to the shooting. The weight of that revelation must have been crushing. Here was a man who had dedicated his career to upholding the law, now faced with the knowledge that his own flesh and blood had committed one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. The father's decision to report his son's confession through a family friend demonstrated the kind of moral courage that transcends even the strongest family bonds. It's a reminder that justice sometimes demands the most painful sacrifices, even from those closest to the perpetrator. Robinson turned himself in late Thursday evening in St. George, roughly 250 miles from the scene of the crime. The manhunt that had consumed law enforcement resources across multiple states came to a quiet end, not with a dramatic shootout or high-speed chase, but with a young man walking into custody, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. The evidence that emerged painted a disturbing picture of premeditation and calculated malice. Digital communications recovered from Robinson's devices revealed detailed planning, including references to retrieving weapons, surveillance of the campus, and even discussions about concealing evidence. These weren't the impulsive actions of someone caught up in a moment of rage, but the methodical preparations of someone who had made a deliberate choice to take another person's life. What made the case even more chilling were the inscriptions found on the ammunition and weapon. Rather than political manifestos or ideological statements, investigators discovered juvenile internet memes and references to video games etched into the very tools of murder. It was a stark reminder of how online culture and digital radicalization can manifest in the most deadly real-world consequences. The political implications of Kirk's assassination reverberated far beyond the crime scene. In a nation already deeply polarized, the killing of such a prominent conservative figure threatened to inflame tensions that were already at a breaking point. Politicians on both sides struggled to find the right words, knowing that their responses could either help heal a wounded nation or pour gasoline on an already raging fire. The tragedy exposed the dangerous intersection of political rhetoric, social media radicalization, and easy access to weapons that has become an unfortunate hallmark of modern American life. Here was a young man who had apparently been consumed by political hatred to the point where he saw murder as an acceptable solution to ideological disagreement. As the dust settled and the immediate crisis passed, the broader questions remained unanswered. How does a society prevent such acts of political violence? What responsibility do we all bear for the toxic environment that can transform disagreement into deadly hatred? The assassination of Charlie Kirk represents far more than the tragic loss of a single life. It serves as a stark warning about the dangerous path our nation is traveling when political discourse transforms into deadly violence. From that ordinary Wednesday morning at Utah Valley University to Tyler Robinson's surrender just days later, we witnessed how quickly hatred can escalate from online rhetoric to real-world tragedy. The investigation revealed the chilling reality of how digital radicalization operates in our modern age. Robinson's juvenile inscriptions on his ammunition, mixing internet memes with instruments of death, paint a disturbing portrait of how online culture can warp young minds toward violence. His meticulous planning, documented in digital communications, shows this wasn't a moment of passion, but a calculated decision to silence a voice through murder. Perhaps most heartbreaking of all was the impossible position faced by Robinson's father, a law enforcement veteran forced to choose between protecting his son and upholding justice. His ultimate decision to report his son's confession reminds us that integrity sometimes demands the most painful sacrifices. As we reflect on these events, we must confront the uncomfortable truth that political violence doesn't emerge from a vacuum. It grows in environments where opposing viewpoints are demonized, where disagreement becomes hatred, and where some believe murder is an acceptable response to ideas they oppose. The question now facing our nation is simple but profound. Will we choose the difficult path of healing and dialogue, or will we continue down this road where political differences are settled through violence?